Most people believe gratitude comes after life improves. They think they will be thankful once the problem is solved, once the money arrives, once the healing happens, once the situation finally changes. But true gratitude does not wait for circumstances to shift. True gratitude is a decision made in advance. It is a choice you make while things are still uncertain. It is a posture of the heart that says, even here, even now, I will give thanks. Every morning presents two options. You can wake up focusing on what is missing, or you can wake up acknowledging what is present. You can rehearse yesterday's disappointments, or you can recognize today's opportunities. The difference between these two choices shapes the entire direction of your day. When gratitude becomes a habit, it changes how you interpret everything that happens around you. Situations that once felt unbearable begin to feel manageable. Delays that once felt like punishment begin to look like preparation. Problems that once felt permanent begin to look temporary. Gratitude is not pretending everything is fine. It is not ignoring pain or denying struggle. It is simply choosing not to allow pain to dominate your perspective. You can be honest about your challenges and still be thankful. You can acknowledge disappointment and still recognize blessing. Both can exist at the same time. Gratitude does not mean life is perfect. Gratitude means God is present. Waiting to be grateful until life becomes easier is a trap, because if gratitude depends on perfect conditions, you will always find a reason to withhold it. There will always be something you wish were different. There will always be something you want improved. But when you decide that gratitude is not conditional, you take back control of your attitude. You stop letting external circumstances dictate your internal state. Choosing gratitude is an act of faith. It says, I believe something good is happening even when I cannot see it. It says, I trust that what feels like a setback may actually be a setup. It says, I believe God is working behind the scenes, arranging details, aligning connections, opening doors, and closing others for my protection. This kind of gratitude is powerful because it is rooted in trust, not convenience. Daily gratitude trains your mind to search for evidence of goodness. Instead of scanning your life for problems, you begin scanning for blessings. You notice small victories. You notice moments of peace. You notice strength you did not realize you had. You notice how far you have already come. Over time, this rewires your thinking. You become less reactive, less bitter, less overwhelmed. You begin responding to life with steadiness instead of panic. Gratitude also guards your heart against negativity. Complaining magnifies what is wrong. Gratitude magnifies what is right. What you magnify grows. When you constantly talk about what you lack feels larger. When you consistently talk about what you have, abundance begins to feel real even before it shows up in tangible form. Making gratitude a daily choice does not mean you will never feel frustrated or discouraged. It means those feelings no longer control you. It means you feel them, acknowledge them, and then choose to rise above them. You decide that your joy will not be hostage to circumstances. You decide that your peace will not depend on perfect timing. You decide that your faith will not be shaken by temporary difficulty. Each morning, before checking your phone, before reviewing your to-do list, before engaging with the noise of the world, you make a quiet decision inside your heart. You say, today I choose gratitude, not because everything is right, but because God is faithful. Not because life is easy, but because you are not alone. That simple decision sets the tone for everything that follows. When you change what you focus on, you change what you feel. Perspective is not about altering reality. It is about choosing which part of reality you will give your attention to. Every situation contains multiple angles, and the angle you consistently look from determines how heavy or how hopeful life feels. Gratitude acts like a lens that shifts your vision away from constant lack and toward quiet abundance that often goes unnoticed. Atmosphere is not just something around you, it is something you carry within you. You walk into rooms with either expectation or exhaustion, with either hope or heaviness. Gratitude creates an internal climate where peace can grow. When your heart is thankful, stress loses some of its power. When your spirit is grateful, discouragement does not settle as easily. You begin to realize that even when things are imperfect, they are not empty of purpose. Many people assume their mood is controlled by what happens to them, but in reality, much of what we experience emotionally is shaped by how we interpret what happens. Two people can walk through the same storm and come out with completely different outlooks. One becomes bitter, the other becomes better. The difference is not the storm, the difference is perspective. Gratitude teaches you to look at storms as temporary and growth producing rather than permanent and defeating. When you choose gratitude, you stop asking only, why is this happening to me? And begin asking, what can this teach me? That shift alone opens your mind to growth. You begin to see challenges as training grounds. You begin to recognize that pressure is often preparing you for something greater. Instead of feeling targeted by hardship, you start to feel shaped by it. Gratitude also slows you down enough to notice what is still working in your life. While your mind is tempted to highlight what is broken, gratitude gently redirects your attention to what is still whole. Your heart is still beating, you still have breath, you still have the ability to hope, you still have opportunities ahead of you. These realities may seem simple, but they carry enormous weight when fully acknowledged. Perspective shaped by gratitude brings emotional balance. You are no longer easily shaken by small inconveniences because you are anchored in larger truths. You remember that a bad moment does not equal a bad life. You remember that a delay does not mean denial. You remember that silence does not mean abandonment. This awareness steadies your emotions and prevents extreme reactions. Gratitude also changes how you interpret people. Instead of focusing only on who disappointed you, you begin to appreciate who supported you. Instead of replaying hurtful words, you begin to remember kind ones. This does not excuse wrong behavior, but it prevents bitterness from poisoning your spirit. It keeps your heart soft instead of hardened. When perspective shifts, behavior shifts. You speak differently, you respond differently, you make decisions from calm rather than panic. You become less impulsive and more intentional. Gratitude creates space between stimulus and response. It gives you a moment to breathe, to reflect, to choose wisdom over reaction, your internal atmosphere eventually influences your external environment. When you carry peace, you bring peace into conversations. When you carry hope, you spread hope to others. People feel lighter around you because you are not constantly radiating negativity. Gratitude makes you a source of encouragement rather than a source of complaint. Over time, this new perspective becomes natural. You do not have to force gratitude as much because it becomes your default setting. You instinctively look for good even in difficult seasons. You instinctively expect growth even in painful moments. That is the quiet power of gratitude. It does not erase problems, but it reframes them, and that reframing can change the entire trajectory of your day, your mindset, and ultimately your life. There is a kind of faith that waits until it sees results before it responds. And then there is a deeper kind of faith that responds before anything changes. Thanking God before the breakthrough belongs to that deeper level of trust. It is the kind of faith that does not need visible proof to remain confident. It is the kind of faith that says, I believe you are working even when I cannot track the progress. Most people praise when doors open. They celebrate when the answer arrives. They express gratitude when the situation finally turns around. But there is something powerful about offering thanks while the door is still closed, while the answer is still forming, while the waiting is still uncomfortable. This kind of gratitude is not based on outcome. It is based on relationship. It is rooted in the belief that God's character is consistent, even when circumstances are inconsistent. When you thank God in advance, you are declaring that His word carries more weight than what your eyes currently see. You are choosing to trust promise over appearance. You are choosing to trust truth over emotion. This does not mean you ignore reality. It means you refuse to let temporary reality define eternal truth. Thanking God before the breakthrough stretches your faith. It pulls you out of passive waiting and places you into active expectation. Instead of sitting in uncertainty, you begin standing in anticipation. You begin to live as though what you prayed for is already on the way. That posture changes how you carry yourself. It changes your tone. It changes your decisions. You start preparing for what you believe is coming. There is also humility in thanking God ahead of time. It acknowledges that you are not your own source. It recognizes that your strength has limits. It confesses that you cannot control every outcome, and in that humility, you create space for divine involvement. You move from striving to trusting, from forcing to resting. Early gratitude also weakens fear. Fear thrives on the unknown. It feeds on uncertainty, but when you thank God in advance, you shift your focus away from what could go wrong and toward who is in control. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios and start rehearsing faith-filled expectations. That mental shift brings peace long before the situation changes. Thanking God before the breakthrough also protects your heart from entitlement. You do not approach God as someone who is owed something. You approach Him as someone who is grateful for everything. This keeps your spirit soft. It keeps your prayers sincere. It keeps your relationship with God rooted in love rather than transaction. Another powerful effect of early gratitude is alignment When you thank God in advance, your will begins to align with His will. You move from demanding a specific outcome to trusting His best outcome. You begin to say, I may not know how this should unfold, but I trust your wisdom. That alignment brings peace because you are no longer trying to control what you were never meant to control. Thanking God before the breakthrough also changes your emotional posture. You are no longer waiting with tension. You are waiting with hope. You are no longer waiting with frustration. You are waiting with expectation. That difference matters because waiting with hope feels lighter than waiting with fear. Over time, this practice builds spiritual confidence. You start remembering past moments when you thank God before seeing results, and then watch things shift in unexpected ways. Those memories become fuel for future faith. You realize that God has a track record. You realize that He has never failed you, even if the path looked different than you imagined. Early gratitude does not guarantee instant results, but it guarantees something just as important. It guarantees that your heart stays anchored, your faith stays alive, and your hope stays strong while you wait. Fear gains strength when it is left unchallenged. It grows in silence. It multiplies when it is constantly entertained in the mind. Every fearful thought that goes unchecked becomes a seed that eventually produces anxiety, hesitation, and paralysis. But praise interrupts that cycle. Praise enters the mind like light entering a dark room. It does not argue with darkness. It simply replaces it. When you begin to praise, your focus shifts. Instead of staring at the size of your problem, you start acknowledging the greatness of God. Instead of replaying worst-case scenarios, you start rehearsing God's faithfulness. This shift weakens fear because fear depends on magnification. It survives by convincing you that your situation is bigger than your God. Praise reverses that narrative. Praise reminds you of who God has been. It brings past victories back into your awareness. It reminds you of prayers that were answered, doors that were opened, and dangers that were avoided. These memories become evidence that fear cannot compete with. Fear speaks in possibilities. Praise speaks in testimonies. Possibilities are uncertain. Testimonies are facts. Fear often sounds logical. It presents itself as caution, realism, or preparation. But beneath the surface, fear's true goal is to stop movement. It wants to keep you from trying again. It wants to keep you from trusting again. It wants to keep you from believing that change is possible. Praise pushes against that resistance. Praise declares movement. Praise declares expectation. Praise declares life. When praise becomes part of your routine, hope begins to rise naturally. Hope is the quiet confidence that something good is still possible. It is not loud, it is not flashy, but it is steady. Praise fuels that steadiness. Every time you lift your voice in gratitude, you are adding oxygen to the flame of hope. Hope does not require perfect conditions. Hope does not require immediate answers. Hope simply requires a reason to believe. Praise supplies that reason. Praise reminds you that God is still present. Praise reminds you that you are not abandoned. Praise reminds you that your story is not over. Fear focuses on what might happen. Hope focuses on what can happen. Fear imagines loss. Hope imagines restoration. Fear imagines failure. Hope imagines growth. Praise gently redirects your imagination away from destruction and toward possibility. There is also a physical aspect to praise. When you praise, your breathing changes, your posture often changes, your tone changes. These small physical shifts send signals to your brain that you are safe. That safety reduces the body's stress response. Over time, praise becomes a calming practice, not just a spiritual one. Praise does not mean you never feel afraid. It means fear no longer has the loudest voice. You can acknowledge fear without obeying it. You can feel uncertainty without surrendering to it. Praise gives you that separation. It reminds you that you are more than your emotions. Another powerful effect of praise is that it lifts your awareness beyond yourself. Fear is inward. Focus teaches you to constantly scan your own limitations. Praise is outward. Focus teaches you to recognize God's unlimited power. That outward focus brings relief. You stop carrying burdens that were never meant to be carried alone. As praise weakens fear, hope begins to influence your choices. You start taking small steps again. You start praying bold prayers again. You start dreaming carefully but courageously again. These are signs that hope is alive. Hope does not mean you are certain about outcomes. It means you are confident about God's presence within the process, and that confidence is enough to keep moving. Over time, a praising heart becomes a resilient heart. It bends, but it does not break. It feels pressure, but it does not collapse. It experiences storms, but it still expects sunshine. That is the quiet power of praise. It does not eliminate challenges, but it equips you to face them without being consumed. Gratitude is more than polite words spoken after receiving something good. Gratitude is a spiritual posture that creates openness. It is an internal stance that says, I am aware, I am receptive, I am trusting. When you live with that posture, you make room for God to move in ways you may not immediately recognize, but deeply experience. Many people pray asking God to intervene, but at the same time, they hold tight to frustration, resentment, and doubt. These inner conditions do not stop God from being powerful, but they often stop us from being aware. Gratitude clears internal noise. It quiets mental clutter. It softens emotional tension. And in that quietness, you become more sensitive to subtle guidance, gentle nudges, and unexpected opportunities. Gratitude shifts your relationship with God from transactional to relational. Instead of approaching God only when you need something, you begin approaching Him because you value His presence. That shift matters. When your connection with God is built on appreciation rather than desperation, your heart stays open even in waiting seasons. You are not constantly measuring God's love by outcomes. You are resting in the reality that His love is constant. An open heart is a responsive heart. When gratitude fills your heart, obedience becomes lighter. You become more willing to follow direction, even when it does not make immediate sense. You become more receptive to correction, even when it challenges your comfort. You become more flexible when plans change. That flexibility allows God to redirect you without resistance. Gratitude also reduces internal resistance created by pride. Pride says, I deserve. Gratitude says, I receive. Pride clenches. Gratitude opens. When you move from entitlement to appreciation, your spirit becomes teachable. You acknowledge that everything you have is a gift. That humility creates space for more growth, more wisdom, and more responsibility. Another way gratitude invites God to move is by aligning your expectations with His character rather than your timeline. You stop demanding instant results and start trusting long-term purpose. You move from saying, "It has to happen now," to saying, "I trust you know when." That trust removes pressure from your soul. And a soul at rest hears God more clearly. Gratitude also trains you to notice movement you previously overlooked. Not every miracle is loud. Not every breakthrough is dramatic. Sometimes God moves through small changes, quiet conversations, delayed problems, and unnoticed protections. A grateful heart notices these details. An ungrateful heart dismisses them. When you begin acknowledging small movements, your awareness of God's activity increases. As awareness increases, your confidence increases. You start realizing that God has been working all along, even in seasons you thought were stagnant. That realization builds trust, and trust deepens your willingness to surrender control. Surrender is not weakness. Surrender is partnership. It is saying, "I will do my part, but I trust you to do what I cannot." Gratitude supports that posture because it reminds you that God has already done more than you deserved. That memory keeps your expectations grounded in grace rather than demand. Gratitude also changes the emotional tone of your prayers. Instead of sounding like complaints, your prayers begin to sound like conversations. Instead of sounding rushed, they become reflective. Instead of sounding desperate, they become hopeful. That shift strengthens intimacy with God. When intimacy grows, responsiveness grows. When responsiveness grows, alignment grows. When alignment grows, movement becomes easier. You may not always see immediate results, but something is happening beneath the surface. Doors are being positioned, hearts are being softened, paths are being cleared, timing is being arranged. Gratitude does not force God's hand, but it opens your heart. And an open heart is the best environment for transformation